First thing to look at is our staff costs. Staff costs include things like how much you're going to pay your employees per hour, how many hours they're going to work, and how many employees you think you'll need. So let's think about staff costs. What are some of the inputs we'll need for our staff costs? First thing I can think of is wages per hour. So what's it going to cost us for each employee, to pay each employee per hour? Let's assume it's $25 an hour in year one, because costs go up, $25.75 in year two, and in year three it's $26.52. And if you actually look at the formula that's been put in here, that's been grown by the 3% inflation, which is that same input in row 17. The next thing we want to think about is how much staff we'll need. So don't think about in terms of how many people you'll need, but think about in terms of how many man hours you'll need. You'll need people to bake the muffins, so maybe you'll have cooking hours per day, so how much for the staff that does all the cooking, and then how much staff you need for the serving. So we can break down those assumptions. So let's think how many hours we'll need someone to cook, cooking hours per day, and let's say we need someone baking muffins for 3 hours. We're open 5 hours a day, so we need to have someone manning the coffee cart 5 hours a day. We'll add that same assumption, 5. And then we also know we need people to clean up at the end of the day. So let's call it pack up, and let's assume that's another hour. So maybe half an hour in the morning, half an hour at the end of the day.
So notice in this model, we've got like a 9-hour workday. This is one of these things where the model in theory land is telling us some very practical realities about the kind of business we're going to run. Do we want to be on our feet 9 hours a day?
So in terms of calculating our employee expenses, let's figure out how many hours a day we've got. We know we've got 3 hours cooking, plus 5 hours serving, plus another hour for packing up and down. So that's 9 hours a day, times the hourly rate of $25 an hour. And now, if we enter that formula in, it gives us $225. Now that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when, we're dealing in the tens of thousands for our profit margin, because we know that intuitively employee expenses are one of our larger expense categories. So what's wrong with the formula? Hang on, the cash flow is in the unit of time is a year, but I'm coming up with a daily cost. So what I need to do is convert that formula to be an annual figure. So if I know that's a daily cost, I've got to multiply that by 5 days a week, and we know we've got 45 weeks a year. So that, by multiplying it by 5 and another 45, we should get an annualized figure, and that cost of $50,000 is looking high, but quite accurate, and we'd expect it to take up a big chunk of our gross profit. It is one of the larger expenses we can expect in a business. So if we copy that formula over, we're getting a slight increase on our employee expenses each year because of the inflationary factor. Let's go back, and when we think about all the other operating costs we've got, let's just jot them all down. So we're going to have some marketing costs. We know we want to print some flyers. Let's think about rent. We know we've got to pay rent per month, because that's how we pay our rent. Mobile phone plans are also charged on a monthly basis. We might decide we want to have a 1-300 number. We're probably going to want a website. Insurance. Let's assume we've done all of our research and we've understood that it's going to cost us $500 in year one, $250 in year two, and another $215 in year three. For rent, let's say we've got monthly rent of $1,000, but we know that it's probably fair to assume that the landlord's going to want to increase our rent, at least on an annual basis. So let's assume he does it by 3%. Be lucky if he does it by 3%. And now we've come to insurance, and the insurance quote I've got is actually not a monthly cost, it's actually an annual cost. Typically insurance charges you per year, so let's assume our insurance is $1,000 a year, and let's just be very clear that it's a yearly cost. Right, so $1,000 a year, and we know that the insurance company is going to raise our premium. We're just assuming it goes up by inflation. So it doesn't matter what unit of time you use to to put in for your assumptions. What really matters is when you're generating the outputs, they're all converted to a standard unit of time. So if some of the operating costs are monthly, some are yearly, some are daily, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent in generating the same unit of time for your outputs. I would recommend thinking about operating costs in the way that's most logical for each line item. So it doesn't make sense to think about daily rent unless you pay your rent daily. Okay, so now we've got our basic operating cost assumptions. Let's go back and see how it all translates in our cash flow. Okay, so let's think about marketing. We've put $500 worth of flyers in year 1, so that's an annual figure, so happy pulling that over. And we can just copy that formula over. It just pulls the cell immediately to the right of the previous. Rent, let's go back and calculate our rent. So we've inputted our rent on a monthly basis, so we know we're going to be operating roughly 12 months of the year. Our landlord doesn't really care that we're not operating that whole time. We're going to have to pay for the full 12 months, our annual rent. We can copy that same formula over and it'll pull the assumptions from one cell to the right. Insurance, let's go back. Now our insurance is an annual cost, so an annual input, so we don't need to multiply that by 12. We just draw that annual number, $1,000 in year 1. Electricity is inputted on a quarterly basis, so we know that there are 4 quarters in a year. So instead of multiplying by 12, let's multiply by 4. So sometimes you can add a contingency line item if you just want to make sure you've got enough of a buffer. So basically, to calculate your contingency, you need to basically take the sum of all your costs, go back to our assumptions and grab the 10% contingency and multiply it by that 10%. And we'll copy that formula over and then types in a formula equals sum, and then shift and the up arrow key within the brackets to select all the cells you want. Copy that formula over. We can see our operating expenses are in the 70,000s. We know that EBITDA is our gross profit minus our operating expenses, and it gives us EBITDA in year 1 of just under $9,000. Copying the formula over, year 2 $42,000 and year 3 $95,000. Now our EBITDA is going up quite significantly because, as we can see, our revenue is going up greater than our costs, and that is coming out in our EBITDA margin, which in year 1 is only 7%, but because of the increased profits in year 2 and 3, it goes up to 24%, then 38%. Now that's the direction we want our margins to go in.